Hi, we are live on YouTube right now. So, hello everyone. I am neetaaneja and I'm the founder of Trends Literature Series. Our Prime Minister Modi ji said that Birsa Munda shook the British Empire with his traditional bow and arrow. He fought not only for political freedom, but also for the social and economic fight of the tribals. Today, we discuss the new and much anticipated book, The Legend of Birsa Munda, which is a folklore, as everyone has been saying, which was really waiting to be retold, and an epic tale of a forgotten hero, someone who mobilized the tribal community, and someone whose contribution to Indian struggle should never be forgotten. So, with this, I really welcome the authors of the book, The Legend of Birsa Munda, Tuhin Sinha and Ankita Verma, on our 84th episode. Such an honor to have both of you with us.
My pleasure, Neeta ji. It's always great to be on your show, and I admire the passion with which you conduct these author interviews. I think almost twice every week.
Yes, at least once we try, definitely.
Brilliant.
Thank you, Neeta ji. Thank you for creating such lovely platforms for authors and like-minded people to connect. So it's really awesome. So I must thank you for this.
Thank you for such kind words. It keeps us going and it keeps us motivated to keep on, having all the wonderful authors like you on our platform. Tuhin Sinha, as we all know, is the best-selling author of multiple books. He's a screenwriter, he's a politician, and he's the BJP spokesperson. And Ankita is a communications expert. She's an expert on advertising, communication, and marketing, and an author. So Tuhin, I'll delve into the conversation straight away with you. You've been experimenting on different genres so successfully, I must say. Your experience in building up narratives, interesting format, immense readability of your books, and very, very easy approach is definitely reflected in this book too. So how was it writing a book on Birsa Munda, which definitely is quite different from the other books that you've written? Any challenges that you faced, or maybe you would like to share?
Birsa Munda, the book, I think it's a really gorgeous book. So I think the story was with me for the last many years. I have grown up in a place called Jamshedpur, and the place where I grew up is barely about 100 kilometers from the epicenter of Birsa Munda's revolution. Absolutely. So there was always this curiosity to know more about the character, but unfortunately, in all my growing up years, I think subaltern heroes were looked down upon. There was a certain aristocratic political culture also where we were supposed to defy or worship two freedom fighters, and the rest were supposed to be overlooked. But I think a lot changed in 2014. And the number of times that our Prime Minister has spoken about Birsa Munda should tell you the story of how unsung heroes are being mainstreamed now.
Correct.
So I always wanted to write the book, and fortunately, just on the eve of the lockdown, Ankita and I have known each other on social media, and she also, had very nationalist sentiments and moorings. So when she, got in touch for some other book, she wanted some, some feedback on something else. I just broached the subject, and she was equally excited. And since the subject had been on my mind for a very long time, I thought the lockdown is the best time to just make the most out of it. So that's how the book happened.
And you do call your current book a dramatized biography, which definitely is, and it is wonderful to read. I could, just finish it off in one sitting. It was that interesting. And yes, and tell us more, while you were writing the narrative of this book, how was it to transport yourself to the maybe 19th century tribal village that you've talked about in this book? And definitely, as you just mentioned, it has been there on your mind for so long.
My forte is structuring, characterization, and the larger, the storyboarding. So I think Ankita has put a lot of effort after that into research, into writing. So while I transport myself simultaneously into many different worlds, I'm in Ukraine right now. So while I can transport myself in many different worlds simultaneously, I think Ankita has done a lot of hard work into actually living in the 19th century. So maybe, you could
Yes, sure.
ask her about the experience.
Ankita, I know Tuhin has just mentioned about you getting together, but I've been really meaning to ask you since I came to know that both of you have written this wonderful book together. So, how did you really get together in writing about Birsa Munda? I understand it would have been maybe some other topic. So, were you sharing the same sentiments? How was it? I mean, and when did you really first time heard about it? Correct? Yes, sorry. Dia, can you please unmute her? Dia. I think you need to, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So actually, I was aware of this character Birsa Munda for a while, and I knew about the character and the kind of general vague idea about it. But when Tuhinji actually proposed this character and his life and the way he presented, the passion with which he presented the thing, it was very exciting. He had this whole vision about the book already with him, and that made life so much more easier in terms of what we wanted the whole package to look like. But mostly it was his great passion. Obviously, the subject was very close to his heart, as he was already mentioning that he came from a place which was actually the epicenter of this grand character. So it was that which got me going the most. So when we got together first, as he rightly saying, we were discussing my another book, and he said that okay, maybe we should do this during the lockdown, and we worked, and he had a lot of ideas already. The rules between the two of us were like quite clear, in the sense that the overall vision was his, about the vision about the character, the narration, and there was an equal balance of responsibility between the research and the storytelling both. So we would all both nudge each other, or he would tell me, "Hey, listen, Ankita, this is how it should pan out," or this is. So it was quite a nice rhythmic kind of an association, and once we got going on it, it was no stopping. So it was an excellent opportunity, and I do feel a lot of gratitude towards being able to be a part of this whole project. So I must thank Twinji also for giving me this opportunity to be able to collaborate on this, and I'm glad to be a part of this project. So very nice. Thank you.
Thank you.
And one more question to you. Now that you know so much about you've been in the a part of the process of writing about Birsa Munda, and everyone says that in his 25 years of existence that was there from 1875 to 1900, he's lived many lives. What do you have to say to that? I mean, everyone has been talking about 25 years, and he's just lived maybe a life where we couldn't have, dreamt of maybe somebody past 60, 70 years of experience.
In his 25 years, I think he has already lived more than 2 centuries, because he's still there today. We are still talking about him today. We are still having this panel discussion on him. So I'm sure in his 25 years, he has already lived more than 150 years, almost 150 years, because we are talking 146 years ago. The thing is that for me, it was clearly the kind of, if I was to look at his life from, let's say, a broad perspective, I could easily see 3 phases that I could identify very clearly. One was of the innocent child, which was full of wonderment, full of idealism about what he wanted and how he saw the things around him when he was growing up, and then the second phase, in which he's the preacher who's guiding his people, not just spiritually, but also like on socially, like not just spiritually, socially, but the way they will need to live their lives, their food habits, the way they approach the whole living part of it, the social living part of it. And then the third, where he is the brave warrior, and that's when he actually physically gets into that act of leading his people into the war against the British, who are like have guns in their hands, and these guys have just bhala or barchi leke lad rahe hain. So it was it was amazing the way within these 25 years he has lived some three very distinct stages, almost an eternity. So I'm more I discovered, the more I researched about the character, the more I was in awe of him. So I'm totally in awe of the character.
And Tuhin, I mean, as far as Birsa Munda was concerned, he was a lion-hearted, as they say, warrior, a healer, and a spiritual guide. And he received the status of being a Bhagwan. So why do you think he received the status of being a Bhagwan? For people who've not read the book, perhaps coming from you, they should read the book definitely.
So, essentially, when, as Ankita was mentioning, he's had many different transformations in his short span of 24 years. So when in 1890, when he was about 15 years of age, and when he left the Christian missionary school in Chaibasa, there was an incident in the village after which he was spurned by villagers. And for the next 4 years, he was just wandering. He lived a life of wilderness where he came across a spiritual guru, a Vaishnavite spiritual guru by the name of Anand Pandey, who brought about a major transformation in him. So when he resurfaced in his village around 1894, he resurfaced in a very different avatar, in a very enlightened avatar. And he was known as a healer and a reformer. He eventually went on to become a reformer. And in a span of 1 year, which is 1894 to mid 1895, the kind of following that he generated, like people would throng to his village to get a darshan of him, to meet him, to get his blessings. So this kind of cult following was very unusual for somebody in such a short period of time. But yes, I mean, whoever, primary sources of information are very few in the case of subaltern history. But there are adequate sources to corroborate that his influence was ethereal. And at some point of time, the British panicked over the growing support and felt that unless he was put behind bars, and there was a parallel thing which was unfolding, which, you would need to factor in to understand the whole phenomena. The Sardar rebellion, the Munda Sardars had been rebelling off and on from 1857 onwards after the War of Independence. Now, often there would be phases where their rebellion would die down because of lack of resources, because they were vulnerable to corruption, they were vulnerable to being bought over by Christian missionaries or by funds. So in 1895, when they had been lying low for several years, it was the cult following of Birsa Munda which actually gave them hope that if they propelled Birsa Munda into the forefront, the Munda rebellion could get a new lease of life. So one needs to make a distinction over here. Birsa Munda's violent political revolution only happened towards the end, which was a result of him being persecuted, which was a result of him being victimized and put behind bars for no rhyme or reason, because he was basically trying to unleash a certain set of reforms which was lagging behind in the Adivasi community. Yes, simultaneously, the Munda Sardars who had been lying low wanted him to rebel and stage a political fight and a violent political fight. But it was only when he was subsequently incarcerated, he was subsequently put behind bars. It was only upon his release in November 1897 that he seriously considered the idea of a political revolution, which assumed a very violent form in late 1890. And, in a span of 1 month, the entire British Empire, at least in those areas, was shaken by the impact of it. So the kind of cult following which Birsa Munda generated in such a short span of time naturally had people address him as Bhagwan. And but it's very interesting that over a period of many decades thereafter, the Britishers or even the Congress governments did not refer to him as Bhagwan. After many decades and possibly a century, it was only around 2014 when our Prime Minister started referring to him as Bhagwan once again.
Yes.
So I think history is very strange. Even after, an individual's death, I think one has a destiny even after his death. So I think the age of Birsa Munda after, I think is just about coming.
So very right. In fact, he was a person with immense willpower and strength. You know, you have mentioned in the book that how Birsa Munda was brought to the court from the prison. And it was really sad how Commissioner Forbes really treated him. Birsa Munda was a revolutionary whose destiny he knew, as you mentioned in the book, was to be martyred. So what do you have to say to that? Like, how come a 25-year-old having so much of willpower and strength?
The like subaltern revolutions, and especially of the tribal communities, have existed in India from 1770s onwards. Tilka, Maji, Raghunath Mahato are some of the first names which are recorded in which have limited records in history. But in Birsa Munda's case, for a very long time, that the impact of that revolution was missing in those areas, and he revived that movement. The basic complexity of subaltern freedom movement was that would be usually be, that the Britishers, at least in tribal areas, acted through their offshoots. The zamindars on the one hand and the missionaries on the other hand acted as offshoots. So it was a very indirect fight, which and it was a very complex or a very complicated fight for the Adivasis to take on the zamindars on the one hand and to take on the missionaries on the other hand. And both were eventually interconnected because the missionaries would often entice the Adivasis to get converted, offering them all kinds of sops that their loans would be waived off, their debts would be waived off. But eventually they would fall into a trap and realize that the same missionaries were eventually funded by the zamindars, who would make sure that the debts would not be waived off, who would make sure that the atrocities continue. So that's what makes Birsa's revolution all the more special. He fought these multiple villains or these multiple antagonists together. But here, somewhere towards the end of the 19th century, the primary culprit in those areas tended to be a German missionary by the name of Father Hoffmann, whose vicious conversions had assumed a very, had led to a lot of social unrest. And much of Birsa's angst and anger was directed towards him, though eventually, like I said, all of them were interconnected. So by default, he was fighting the British administration.
So very right. I have some very interesting interactive questions coming up. And one last question for you, Ankita, before I move on to my interactive round and maybe come back if we have time permitting. So how do you feel and how satisfied do you feel about the overwhelming response and the overall, response and a lot of encouragement that you've been getting from the readers about this book?
But to begin with, I feel a lot of gratitude to be, as I mentioned earlier, to be part of this project. But more than that, it really is a very, very happy moment, or rather glad feeling to know that people have such great appetite and acceptance and eagerness towards knowing the stories of such heroes, or understanding our own legacy which is there behind. And so there is this hunger in people to know, and that's really, really nice, and it's really, really encouraging, and it gives me hope. It gives me hope that moving ahead in future, we'll see many more such heroes and their heroic tales being told, and such heroes being celebrated in the true spirit of nationalism, the way they should be. So I'm really happy that, and also I'm very happy that when Tuhinji told me that this book is also going to be in Hindi, and I said, wow, that's really awesome. I think in Hindi and maybe possibly in Marathi too later on. So that's really awesome, because we are extending the reach of the book to a larger audience, and definitely feels great. Definitely.
I can't resist one question to Tuhin. Tuhin, you've been also promoting that Birsa Munda should be getting the Bharat Ratna. And that's, I think, such an amazing thing to do, because leaders like him, tribal leaders who were not really so popular, and we didn't know about them, with your book, with Prime Minister Modi ji's initiative, and also doing so much. I mean, especially I think he declared the 15th November as a Janjatiya Divas, and Also, Jharkhand was given the statehood also on his birth anniversary, 125th. So, Tuhin, about this Bharat Ratna that you've been promoting for Birsa Munda, why do you want to do that, and why do you think he
Well,
deserves
we
it?
have a nearly 10% tribal population, which still is, lagging behind on many different parameters, even though in the last 8 years, the deliverance mechanism has improved manifold. You know, almost all of them have at least sanitation cover in their localities or in their houses. They have electricity. But even then, I think there is a certain dearth of belongingness, because of which they are invariably prone, one, to the Naxal movement, and two, still to conversion happening in a very malafide and shady manner in several parts of the country. So by bestowing this honor upon their icon, and today Birsa Munda, mind you, during the course of the research of this book, it was also a learning experience for me in many ways. The tribal community is not restricted to one or two states. It is spread across at least 15 different states, be it the Northeast, be it Rajasthan, be it Andhra, be it Chhattisgarh or Madhya Pradesh. So I think today Birsa Munda, with his popularity, has emerged as a confluence of Adivasi culture. Maybe the analogy may be seeming a little far-fetched, but like Banaras is the confluence of Hindu culture. Birsa Munda today has emerged as that singular icon with which, as a singular iconic representative of the Adivasi community. So by bestowing this honor upon him, we would be bestowing enormous sense of belongingness among the Adivasi community. And today, there is a Birsa Munda in every age. There is a Birsa Munda in each one of us. That's what my belief is. Birsa Munda is basically that emotion, that sentiment of being able to fight back despite being an underdog and bringing about a change which nobody thought you were capable of. So today's Birsa Munda in Indian villages is probably going to usher in a digital revolution in his village, is going to bring his village at par with the facilities and avenues and amenities available in some of the urban centers. So I think this honor, if it is bestowed upon Birsa Munda, would develop a huge sense of belongingness and inspire Adivasi youth in many unknown ways.
Thank you so much, both of you, for bringing out the narrative and bringing out Birsa Munda to every household. I will start the narrative and the interactive session. And Mr. Rahul Ravel could not join us. He's the renowned film director and author of the book Raj Kapoor, and a big fan of your work, Tuhin. He wanted to ask you a question, which he sent to me, that any plans to make Birsa Munda into a movie? The Legend of...
Rahul Ravel is the director. So honestly, almost every week or 10 days, somebody approaches me. But then, most of the people want to block the book. They want to, in the sense they know that it's a subject which is waiting to happen. And in fact, 3 years ago, somebody in the South had made an announcement and for whatever reason hasn't been able to move ahead much on that subject. But if it's whenever it is made into a film or whenever it is made into an OTT series, it has to have a huge canvas, huge amount of planning and huge budgets. In all likelihood, it might be a special effects movie. So, I'm still waiting for the right person to come with the right offer. Maybe Rahul Ravelji, if he was younger, he would have been the best director for it. I still remember his movie Betab. I wish he were here. But so nice of him to think that way. But my only apprehension is that I don't want to block the subject, just by giving it to somebody who may not be able to execute it well. I would rather wait for a Bollywood biggie, and Bollywood guys themselves are very snobbish, so they might not immediately warm up to a tribal hero. So let's wait for the right opportunity.
So in fact, Mr. Ravel was our guest on our 75th episode. I'm sure he's listening, and I'll definitely convey the message too. Now we have Mr. Sushil Podar. He's the Commissioner of Income Tax, Mumbai. And he and his wife, they are the authors of a recently released book, Blaze, A Son's Trial by Fire. So he would like to ask you a question. Welcome, Sushil ji, and taking out time from your busy schedule.
Thank you, Neeta ji, for giving me this opportunity to interact with Tuhin ji and Ankita ji. First of all, let me congratulate you and Ankita ji together for having authored this wonderful book. I haven't read so far. And in fact, let me tell you, Tuhin ji, you are from Jharkhand. And right now, I am in Mumbai. And I spent around 9 years.
Sushil ji, you've...
Just a minute.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was telling you, I just spent around 9 years in Dhanbad and Ranchi area. I did my BTech from ISM Dhanbad and I spent 5 years in Coal India Limited. After spending around 9 years there, I hardly found any talk about Birsa Munda there. I think his legend was forgotten there. I'm talking about sometime 85 to 94. There were hardly any talk on Birsa Munda. And therefore, in that background, this biographical book ought to have written, and you have done the right job by writing this book. His story needs to be told to the world. Having said so, what I understand, Birsa Munda fought against British persecution. But if you see the tribal movement around that area, it has changed dramatically over the period of time in historical time. It was started with isolation policy of tribals. Then it was switched on to assimilation, and then finally to integration. Now we know Birsa Munda fought against British. I want to ask, because you have done a lot of research on Birsa Munda, ideologically where he was more inclined to, keeping tribals in isolated conditions or letting tribals assimilate with the mainstream or integration with the mainstream. I hope you got my question.
Yeah, I got your question, Sushil. See, the modes of communication and the modes of commutation were very limited in those days. So I think the question of integration with the mainstream did not arise so much because these people used to live in very specified hamlets. So I don't think that was anywhere his priority. His priority was the upliftment of the downtrodden Adivasi Samaj, ushering in certain reforms wherein they would, shed some of the age-old superstitions that were holding them back and make them a little more progressive with the times. But insofar as integration was concerned, there is a saying in Hindi, Praja ye तय नहीं करता है कि राजा उससे घुलना मिलना चाहता है कि नहीं. So even if he wanted integration, it was eventually at the, upon the zamindars and the administrative network or the mechanism to decide whether they would want the Adivasis to integrate. So I think his at the core of his activities was a very defined focus to bestow a certain pride in the Adivasis, to make them come out of the circle of subservience and slavery which they were subjected to. And the issues were so hand to mouth in those days, like the abuse of women at the hands of rich zamindars, that to think of larger themes like integration, which he was anyway, which was not in his hands, I don't think was in his minds.
Just now you said another question, if Neetaji permits me.
Please, my pleasure.
Yeah. Another question. Just now you talked about Birsa Munda, Mundaji, he being nationalist. Why do you think he was a nationalist? Because this narrative is changing these days. He was never called a nationalist. He fought for the tribals against the British persecution. That's all. That's what we knew. But the whole narrative is being changed over the period of time. Now he's being called nationalist. Why do you think so?
Well, he's being called a nationalist because he's as much, his contribution to the freedom movement is as invaluable as the freedom of, as the contribution of Sardar Patel or Subhash Chandra Bose. So if you call Subhash Chandra Bose a nationalist, there is no reason why you would not call Birsa Munda a nationalist. The thing is, like I mentioned a little while ago, for me, the entire journey of approaching this book was an eye-opener in many different ways. because parallel to our mainstream movement, an equally impactful freedom movement was unfolding in the villages, was unfolding in unknown tribal hamlets, which was not being reported. So if the mainstream freedom fighters were nationalists, there is no reason why the subaltern freedom fighters should not be considered nationalists. We are not exaggerating. We are just giving them their due, which ideally should have been given many decades ago.
Then I must tell you, you are doing commendable job for Birsa Munda and his cause. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sushil. Next, we have Suruj Prasad. He is an author, healthcare consultant. He's a history lover, and he's been the co-author with Tuhin in a very successful book, Mission Shenzhen. And he was our guest author on our 46th episode. Welcome, Suraj.
Yeah, hi. Sorry,
Hi, Suraj. So nice to see you.
Same here, Tuhin. Hello, Ankita. So
Hi,
just
Suraj.
just ignore my camera and all. I'm just trying to set a new position. So let me just take a little back up front. Fine. I have the book here. So and wonderfully written book and a lot of characters, lot of different names and points of view. And history has been rewritten, and there's a saying which is there that history does not repeat, but it rhymes. And when we don't tend to speak about the past, we tend to forget it. It's like our grandparents' stories, great-grandparents' stories from a community stays by the word. I believe writing stories like this is important for not only the country, but for the planet to understand the past. And Tuhin, you mentioned something about death and destiny. So a couple of lines came to mind, which I'm going to write in our next book. I'm going to share it here. Sometimes destiny is discovered after death. Death sets the soul free. The soul sets the community free. And that's what I feel Birsa Munda's story, Birsa Munda Bhagwan as we call him. I never knew about him till you spoke to me that you're writing a book on this topic. I consider myself a history buff, but I never heard about him. And that led me that there's so much not known. And that's a very big thing. So there's no question. It's just a big thank you for taking those topics. And
Thank you so much.
For
popular people, destiny is written multiple times over after death. As you may have been discovering in the case of Nehru, in the case of Gandhi, in the case of Birsa Munda. So maybe, 50 years later, after all the good work that we do to catapult him into the mainstream, maybe somebody wants to run him down and pit him against somebody else. So I think history for popular people, for freedom fighters, has been written many different times over. And it is still being written, and rewritten for Savarkar and for many other historical characters.
That's true. And it's really, to be honest, I don't know how to say that different opinions are present in the planet, and every opinion needs to be respected. But let people speak and share, and let the narrative win in the end. So I think it's good to bring stories like this. And I love really all the minor characters you prepared, because a lot of minor characters are present in the story. And whether it's a church father, whether it's the even the Ian Smith, it was a cricketer name, but but even the small characters, small things, it's you made a whole universe out of it. And I think as you made a Hindi book out of it, it'll be good to have a picture book and for the young children to actually read and know the stories about this.
Thank you so much. Like I said, everything has its own time. So when the time is right for the book and the character, a movie will also be made.
Yeah. Thank you, Tuhin. Thank you, Ankita. Thank you, Neeta ji.
Thank you, Suraj, for taking our time. Next, we have Mr. Vijay Shankar. He's a senior advocate with High Court and Supreme Court, and he wanted to ask a question. Yes, Vijay ji.
Hi, Vijay ji. How are you?
Hello, good evening, sir. Let me make a clarification. I'm just an advocate, not a senior advocate.
Okay.
Although I've spent several years, I'm yet to become a senior. So nice of madam. That apart, many congratulations on your book. I'll come straight to the question. Sir, why we are so apologetic about armored struggle against the British? Fighting the enemy while being in the good books of the enemy is the general narrative.
Well, we don't need to be. I don't know that is just an apologetic mentality which has come down, which makes you take less self-pride in being a Hindu, which makes you more apologetic about everything that you do, about our cultural practices. Beyond that, I think maybe it's the influence of communist historians who have dominated the scene for many decades and who kept on glorifying the massacres of Aurangzeb. Maybe that's about the only reason, but I'm glad things are changing. I'm glad, small contributions like this book could make a difference to the way we look at history and the way we look at our past.
Thank you so much, sir. I'm looking forward to read the book.
Great. So we would look forward to your feedback. Do write to us and let us know what you think about it.
And do
Yes,
post a review.
I'll do. Thank you so much, sir.
On Amazon. Yes, next we have Aneja. She's one of the co-founders of Trends Literature Series. Yes, Dia.
Hello, ma'am. Hello, sir. It's great listening to you both. So I'll get right to the questions. I have two questions, perhaps one can answer one and the other can answer the other. So my first question was that what was the scene in the book that was hardest for you to write?
Ankita, why don't you take this?
Okay. Well, let me say this, that when you are this was, in fact, it's a very nice question, Dia, because this is something that I have spoken about earlier also while we were discussing a lot of things back and forth with Tuhin ji. One of the biggest challenges of going back to 1875 and writing about a character who existed way back in 1875 was it was virtually writing a period drama, and it was one of the the times, the language, the food. So everything was not just one scene, because I was emotionally connected with all the scenes. So I wouldn't really say that one particular scene was very challenging. It was a challenging process for us as a team to go through. And the biggest challenge was maintaining the authenticity of that time period. Of course, it helped that Tuhin ji had a lot of so we virtually were like addressing and talking and making statements of the way they would greet each other at that point of time, the language that they would use at that point of time. So it was a very interesting thing, but creating that period, recreating it, because let's be honest, there was very little documented material available, and this is probably I can claim, or maybe I can risk making the statement that this is going to be one book which is kind of actually documenting the life of Birsa Munda from start to end, and putting it into a flow. So it was it was a challenging, I wouldn't say difficult, but a challenging experience throughout, but it was an exciting one.
So for me, Dia, if you ask me, the portions where 11-year-old gets admission in that missionary school, where he joins in with all his aspirations, with all his vulnerability, and yet where he's constantly battling, his quest for, imbibing information, enlightenment, along with a fear that it comes along with an obvious cultural subjugation, an obvious humiliation, which he has to go through every day. And he, I think that's the story of every aspirational poor or every aspirational downtrodden even today. And the way he copes up with this duality, the challenge of imbibing information and enlightenment, along with that humiliation for a good 4 years, and then till the time, in a cathartic moment where he finally gives it back. And leaves all of it. I think those portions in school were the most challenging portions to do justice to his character, and also to do justice to the character of the missionaries. For example, if you look at it, even the missionaries have been projected in a very objective light. If one missionary has been this devious guy who wants to convert each and everybody, the other one has been shown to be a very pragmatic person, a very lovable person who shows reason and compassion for his students. So yeah, I mean, those portions were the toughest portions, and it ends up with Birsa shedding or shunning everything and coming back to his village as a loser.
Right. That makes sense. Congratulations on writing this book.
Thank you so much.
So my second question was that if you had to meet your character, Birsa Munda, today, what would you say to him?
Thank you for being Birsa Munda in 1880s and 90s.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
His existence brought about some very, very radical changes at that point of time. And he was able to create a revolution that lasted till today. It continues to burn even today. So I think we have a lot of gratitude to feel towards him.
And any question that you would like him to answer for you? I mean, something which remains still very, still puzzling. Maybe Tuhin, or you can answer that. Something that you still feel is unanswered, and maybe if he were here today.
Some vested political interests have been spreading these canards about Birsa Munda that he, never espoused. He was never, he never aligned himself, or he never saw himself as a Hindu, and they are using Birsa Munda's ideology to further their own political interest and encourage the conversion lobby. So I think if Birsa Munda were alive today, I would request him to enlighten those fake disciples, political disciples, and tell them the truth about his teachings and tell them the truth about his life.
Very well said. Now we have Asha Daima. She's a very senior history educator, and she's been wanting to ask you a question, and that'll be the last question we'll be taking up. Yes, Asha. Thank you for joining, Asha.
Yeah. Hello, Neeta. Hello, Tuhin and Ankita.
Hello, Asha. How are you?
This is my second chance of listening to you, Tuhin, on this platform. I had attended one of your previous interaction as well. So my question is, I'm a bit being critical of present political times. You see, Birsa was a tribal leader. He stood for his people against the state, right? If we overlook that the state was run by a colonial power, if we overlook that fact, in present times also, we have issues. I'm referring to Naxals, I'm referring to Maoists. So they are also fighting against the state, and they have their own issues they are demanding, and they're fighting for that. So do you see any parallels between these two fights? Any difference? Can you draw any kind of similarities?
I think the communist romance of Naxalism needs to end for a coherent and for a peaceful society, because at the core of the Naxal problem, which today is a hoax today, I think, because Naxal movement died down in India as quickly as it emanated in the early 70s. Today, what you see is an out-and-out attempt to break the Indian state, which should not be appreciated. And Naxal activities actually have come down enormously. See, one needs to realize why do these tribal people, why are they prone to these influences? Because they felt a certain alienation with the system. Why did they feel that alienation? Because basic amenities like sanitation cover, like water, like electricity, like health facilities were not reaching them. So I think if the last mile connectivity, the last mile deliverance is improved, which has improved considerably in the last few years, that problem eventually or automatically ceases to exist, because the gap between a city barely 50 kilometers away from that tribal hamlet, and the tribal hamlet tends to diminish. I think it was that divide because of want of amenities which was propelling them into that rebellion mode. But unfortunately, in a democratic setup like India, when you rebel for reasons like those, it is being a rebel without a cause. So fortunately, we have removed the cause also. I think in tribal areas, the connectivity is brilliant. It's seamless now.
Yeah.
And Naxalism doesn't have a place in a modern
Yeah.
society.
Okay, so and plus, I'll take a minute more. I'm a political science teacher, not history teacher, basically. So one thing I draw out from your brief is it's basically communist. It's the politics that is a catalyst in this movement, Naxal or Maoist movement. So it is basically political agenda, one thing. And second thing is when there are democratic processes, there are constitutional provisions, there are all reservations and all. And the issue, their challenges can be sorted out, can be resolved, their grievances can be taken care of within democratic practices. So they are taking these violent ways, and these fights are not justifiable. I think this is the difference.
No, violence has no place in a
colonial
democracy.
times.
This is something. Violence absolutely has no place in a democracy. This has been highlighted even by the architect of our constitution, B.R. Ambedkar, many times. And when violence is unleashed with the Malafide agenda of breaking a nation apart, I think that's all the more condemnable. And even more condemnable is the fact that certain left-leaning intellectuals actually romanticize that Naxalism, which is all about looting people, which is all about creating anarchy in the country.
Yeah, agreed.
I think
An international conspiracy kind of thing. They are using these dissatisfied people.
Let the intelligence agencies.
Ankita wanted to say something.
I'd like to just add just a little bit to what the discussion is. It's a nice discussion Tuhin and Asha are having. What I would like to add is here the basic difference. I believe Birsa Munda, as a person, his need to revolt or to stand for his people was more intrinsic. Intrinsic in the sense that he wanted to not just wanted the freedom from, let's say, the authority, then the Britishers, then not just from the physical slavery and various other. It was also a freedom from the subservient mindset that his people were so used to living in, the kind of social situations that they were so used to and accepting of living in. So he was a reformist. So he was. It wasn't just about I want this or I want this. It was more intrinsic, and that's in that way he felt so much more responsible for his people, and it was probably the reason that his passion and drive was just unending. So there is a marked difference between wanting something that I want this and the intrinsic need to kind of release your people from that subservient mindset. So I think he was coming from that point of view of a reformist. And I guess that played a very important role. So
Agreed, ma'am. Definitely. Intrinsic thing. Yeah. Thank you for answering, Ankita. Thank you, Tuhin. It was nice discussion.
Thank you for being a part of the discussion.
Thank you so much. We can go on and on, but time is also somewhere we need to see. So thank you so much, Tuhin and Ankita, for taking out your valuable time. I wish you all the best with this book.
Absolute pleasure to be on your show again.
Any last thought both of you would like to share with our readers? Anything that you'd like to say in the end?
Well, read the book. It's a thick book, but you need to read it from start to finish.
Yes.
And because for writers, I think the experiences and the thoughts which readers bring to and their interpretations is always an enriching and learning experience for the writer.
Yeah, and I would like to mention it's a fast read and it's very engaging read. So everyone should buy the book. It's available on Amazon bookstores, and you please leave a review on the Amazon. That's also, then the authors come to know about your thoughts. So thank you once again. Anything
Thank
you'd
you
like
so
to
much.
say?
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Neeta. Thank you, Neeta.
Thank you.
So much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone, for joining on
Thank you.
Zoom and YouTube. Do subscribe to our channel and do press the bell icon so that you